Greetings, Max here. This video is about evaluating the teacher in the classroom, especially in an observational context. Before we start, here are a few words about this video series, Under the Magnifying Glass. Welcome to Under the Magnifying Glass. This is a video series presenting different video articles to help teachers in their work. They are partially inspired by teachers in schools who have approached me to get some views on those themes. Perhaps one or more of the talks will be of interest to you. Hi again. This video deals with observations, but it's also directly appropriate to teachers evaluating their own work in the classroom, be it presential or online. I'm basing this on teaching the English language, but the ideas presented here can be applicable to teachers of other languages, or even other subject matters, just as easily. This particular article is dealing with observations, but also is directly appropriate in helping teachers evaluate their own work while teaching in the classroom, be it presential or online. I've been asked on several occasions to share some comments and views concerning the evaluation of a teacher while she or he is teaching. Most of what I'll be presenting today will be directly involved with the observation process and the criteria used in that evaluation, but there are other aspects that will be looked at as well. So, here are a few words on evaluating a teacher in observation and in general. We will look at this in 4 sections. A. Different types of observations. B. Administrative observations. C. Some typical evaluation criteria. And D. Final words and ideas that I'd like to close with. The main focus of this talk will be on sections B and C, where we explore some of the important aspects surrounding observing and evaluating a teacher in the classroom. Many of the points brought up in those 2 sections can be of benefit to the teacher, not just to the administration. Determining what to look for and its relevant context can help individual teachers reflect on how they are approaching and how well they are approaching their work. Beginning with section A, different kinds of observations. We're going to look at 6 different types. Number 1, new teacher observing an experienced teacher. In the first type, we can look at formative observations. Here, teachers observe someone more experienced in general or skilled in certain techniques. New teachers in this case refer to not only teachers new to teaching. They could also be teachers with much experience, but perhaps not much in the areas that are being presented, such as a new technology or a new methodology. It is the observers who are the ones learning and may be asked to explore using those same techniques and ideas later on. Observing another doing something can help when they try it out themselves. Number 2, formative. Experienced teacher observing new teacher. Another kind of formative observation is when a more experienced teacher observes a class, so the observed teacher could get some tips on how to improve some particular aspects. The focus here is on the observed teacher learning from doing things him or herself and later receiving feedback. Number 3, examinatory. Teachers are tested on their teaching. This is a diagnostic observation for examination purposes. For example, the teachers are in a course for a certificate, diploma, or a degree, and besides answering questions about theory, will have to teach 1 or more classes as part of their evaluation. These are usually not formative, and the teachers have to demonstrate proficiency in particular criteria. There may or may not be some feedback as to why they received the marks they did. Another type of observation is a peer observation. This is usually much more informal, and the two teachers agree to observe each other's class, or simply one teacher observes a colleague. Helpful hints, comments, questions, and other forms of feedback are usually kept informal, although some schools might provide some tips or structure in how to approach them. Those tips are usually a modified version of what we will look at later in the administrative observation section in Part B. Reflective observations. Teachers evaluate their own performance. This happens to some extent in every class we teach. We see how the students react to our plans for the class and how we execute them. Besides being an ongoing and somewhat vague look, we can also approach how we see our teaching in a more investigative manner. We can decide on one or two areas of interest and experiment or explore the parameters involved. For example, we could keep journals and record how well we present our instructions or board work or trying something new out. Trying to put into words how something happened can help the teacher identify processes more clearly, as well as help to define thoughts and goals. I will include a few more words for teachers wanting to evaluate their own performance in sections C and D. Administrative. The school checks out the teacher. In these observations, the focus is more on the administration checking to see how and how well the teacher does his or her job. This is typically done with new teachers, but some schools observe their staff annually or rotate the observations, so the steady core of teachers will only be observed every second or third year. Most schools that I know of stop doing observations after the teacher has shown her or his proficiency and value to the school, and it is felt that there is little need for further observations, except in special situations. Part B. Administrative observations. Now that we've had a brief look at 6 different kinds of observations, let's focus in on administrative observations. This would correspond mostly with schools wanting to check out their teachers, but many of the points are relevant to other kinds of observations listed in Part A as well. Administrative observations. Traditional procedure and considerations. Because of the vast variety of different kinds of schools, I decided to present one clear model for reference, and with the idea that this model can and will be modified according to the situation the viewers find themselves in. We'll look at each step in some detail with the perspective of the traditional observation process in many schools. The other kinds of observations mentioned earlier could use a very similar procedure, perhaps with some modifications. Many schools follow this typical sequence of events shown here. Basically, a coordinator or director of the school approaches the teacher. They set up a day in class to be observed. The teacher usually gives the observer a lesson plan before the class. The class is observed, and later they talk about it. Let's look at each of these steps, as each step reflects not only the procedure, but also much of the criteria which play a part in the evaluation. Step 1. Set up the observation. It may sound simple, but there's a lot behind it. One part is the observer and teacher set up a time in class to be monitored. What is communicated and agreed to should be in some written and accessible form, so it can be referenced or confirmed at any time. Expectations of the lesson plan and procedure. During this first meeting, expectations of the lesson plan and procedure are clearly communicated. The school informs the teacher how the observation will take place. Usually the school wishes the lesson plan to be presented in a certain format, and the observer receives it from the teacher by a certain time, often the day before the observed class. Here is an example of an observation form that the observer would give the teacher during the pre-observation meeting. The format would reflect some of the criteria used in evaluation and facilitate the observer in making sure they are being addressed. As the observer and teacher go through the form together, the teacher becomes orientated to what many of the expectations are, both in what is being evaluated and also the procedure itself. I provided one way it could look, but much depends on what criteria would be considered important for your situation. Here are some possibilities that could be included on the lesson plan form. You want the essential information included, of course, like location and time of class and what kind of class it is. A brief class profile can be very useful in orientating the observer, including some subjective comments like how the group is progressing or if there are a few students who stand out in some way. A clear statement of objectives is very important. The teacher communicates the goals and intentions for that class. Many teachers have difficulties understanding what objectives might mean. For example, to do a reading and answer some questions on it is not an objective. It is simply listing an activity which can be ticked on a checkbox when completed, but does not reflect setting goals itself. What subskills will be worked on and why? What is the teacher doing to make some possible progress in those specific areas? How can the observer see that the goals have been achieved, or to what extent? These things should be stated clearly in the objectives of the lesson plan, and later the observer and teacher can discuss to what extent those objectives were successfully achieved. The chronological listing of the activities is the basic lesson plan, and the observer can see the flow from beginning to end. Some encouragement will be given to the teacher to use different kinds of activities and interactions. Brief descriptions of each activity can include how they will be conducted and to what ends. There may be different types of interactions like pair or group work. There might be different teaching techniques or a variety of ways to give instructions, to make corrections, to guide students. Will the examples and explanations be elicited from the students to see how well they understand and to encourage student input? Often observers want to see at least 2 or 3 skills work activities included, with speaking being one of the priorities, and the others in reading, listening, and/or writing. Predicting how long each activity will last can be a check to see how well the teacher can anticipate what will happen, and also used as a reference in a later conversation on where to cut back or to extend, depending on the situation. Anticipating problems or challenges and how they might be dealt with should they arise, adds a little insight into the depth of the teacher's vision for the class. The resources can include photocopies, links to internet content, images, reading or exercises to be used, and any other materials that will or may be part of the class. These should be included when the lesson plan is handed in to the observer. Before the observation, there should be other matters cleared up, such as issues concerning the observer in the classroom. The following should be clarified: where the observer will be situated or seated, the observer's role. In many observations, the observer never participates, but in some schools or situations, this rule of thumb could be more relaxed. How long the observer will be there. Will the whole class be observed or only one segment? How the observer's presence is to be explained. For example, the teacher could inform the class 1 week before that an observation will take place. This can make the students nervous, so it could be emphasized that the observer is there to watch the teacher, not so much the students. As much as possible, the students are to try and act as they usually do, including asking questions or showing that they don't understand something. Step 2. Teacher prepares the lesson plan and gives it to the observer. It is important for the teacher to follow the lesson plan structure provided by the school, unless they agree to another way. Normally, there is a set procedure, and everyone involved is expected to follow it. This appeases the need for most institutional administrations to have set structures, and it can help ease the anxiety of the teachers anticipating what might be coming in their observations. Step 3. Observer and teacher meet and go over lesson plan. This step isn't always done. It may be the case that the observer simply wants to take a quick look at the plan to make sure all the boxes are ticked and the lesson will be done in the ways expected. In some schools, the observer sits down with the teacher and they go over the plan, point by point, discussing objectives and what may or may not happen. Often this is not done, unless the observer anticipates some problems and wishes to bring these to the teacher's attention, perhaps working out possible solutions or more effective alternatives before the class is taught. In formative training, this could be considered an essential step. In formative training, the teacher is still learning many things and won't be clear on many of them. Here is an opportunity for the observer to go through the lesson plan with the teacher, to fine-tune and help interpret the expectations that require further guidance and assistance. In formative training, especially in the beginning phases, the teacher might very much appreciate the observer's insights and influence in shaping the lesson plan before the class is taught. For non-formative observations, this step is often deliberately left out, partly to save time, and also to see what the teacher can do on their own, without too much influencing. If the teacher is simply given the parameters and the lesson plan is not gone over, the good and the weaker elements of the person's teaching might stand out more. Step 4. The class is observed. As mentioned earlier, it is usually the case that the observer doesn't interact with the class, other than a friendly hello at the beginning when being introduced, and a friendly goodbye at the end of the class. The students could also be warned that the observer will be doing a fair amount of writing occasionally. This doesn't mean people are doing things wrong. It simply means the observer wants to make some comments about some aspect of the class. It could very well be how well something is going, or perhaps it could be an idea on how to do something differently. Teachers are normally very nervous about being observed, and as much as possible, it is advisable for the observer to put the teacher at ease, and it is desirable for the students to act as normally as possible. Step 5. The observer writes up a report on the observed class. The observer has his or her notes and will write up a report after the class, or perhaps was writing it during the class. Usually a copy of the report will be kept by the observer or the school, and another is given to the observed teacher. It is the policy in some schools that the teacher should read the report, and if she or he disagrees with anything, they have the opportunity to write a comment which will be attached to that report. It should be noted that this report is not given to the teacher until or after the teacher and observer meet to discuss the class. Step 6. Teacher and observer meet and go over observed class. This meeting should be done as soon after the observed class as possible, while everything is still relatively fresh in both their minds. If the observer can complete at least a rough version of the report during the class, then they might meet immediately after the class. Often, though, the observer might need time to put together the report and his or her thoughts on some areas, so they might meet up 1 or 2 days after the class. Quite often the teacher doesn't receive the report until later in the meeting. The observer starts the session off in a neutral tone and asks the teacher how she or he thought the class went. In many schools, this meeting is interactive and the teacher is encouraged to comment on different aspects of the class. The observer will bring up certain points, but the teacher can bring up other points as well. And it is typical to highlight some of the things that were done well in the lesson planning, its execution, or dealing with things which didn't appear in the original lesson plan. It isn't just the observer pointing out what could be improved. And the observer could also accept that there are various ways to do things, and elicit or point out alternatives if that would be of some benefit to the teacher. If there were many points that the teacher could work more on, it might be best to limit them in the report and in the discussion to just 2 or 3. A smaller number is easier to digest, better for morale, and can help motivate the teacher to focus on those. Later, perhaps other ideas could be pointed out. As much as possible, I strongly recommend the session be a dialogue where the observer and the teacher explore some of the themes together. If it is only the observer lecturing the teacher on how to improve, even if the observed class didn't go over well, this session won't be as helpful or as interesting as it could be to the teacher. Engage the teacher. Get them thinking, considering solutions, alternatives, defining and clarifying objectives and techniques. You want to inspire and motivate and guide the teacher, not to lecture him or her. Step 7. Optional. The observer and teacher make plans for a follow-up. This could be the case if a class didn't go over well at all. But follow-up observations are also often used in formative observations and training. Formative approaches focus more on the growth of the teacher, although some administrative observations could serve both purposes, administrative and formative. When the observer sees one or more areas that the teacher can make further progress in, the observer suggests how that could be approached, and then at a future date, another observation may or will be done to see how well the teacher is faring regarding those aspects that were discussed. A follow-up doesn't have to mean doing another observation. It could also be some homework for the teacher, whereby she or he investigates something and gets back to the observer about what she or he has discovered. That could include experimenting with something in the classroom, reading up about some technique, asking another teacher about how they approach something in their classes, or even doing a peer observation with another teacher. This further investigation doesn't have to imply that the teacher lacks anything in his or her teaching. It could be exposing him or her to other areas. This brings us to Section C, some typical evaluation criteria. We have briefly referred to some of these criteria earlier. These are possible areas the observer wants to explore, or the observed teacher would like feedback on. These criteria help the teacher identify areas to reflect on, and could potentially help the students make better progress and use of their time. Does the teacher deal with those areas of concern? And if so, how well or to what extent? By the way, in my early years of teaching, I knew I needed to tighten up my teaching in many ways, but I couldn't quite figure out clearly what they were. These evaluation criteria I am listing here can also help clarify those aspects for teachers wishing to reflect on and develop their own teaching. Obviously, because there is such a variety of schools and reasons for having observations, every situation and criteria for your evaluation will vary a lot. The following listing should be considered only as possible examples to choose from, and each observer or institution or teacher can develop their own according to their needs and purposes. Only some of the following criteria would be focused on. Here are some possible evaluation criteria that the observed teacher may receive points or comments on. How well the teacher anticipates potential problems. This can often be seen in the lesson plan itself. How well the teacher deals with problematic situations, which may or may not have been anticipated. Sometimes there are surprises. Starting a class, warming students up to English, perhaps to a theme or an activity, reviewing language or points from last class. Having things at the ready, handouts, videos or listenings queued up, materials needed, clear and easy to follow lesson plan. This can also include good management of time, as when the students are all well on their way in a pair work speaking activity, and the teacher sets up the next activity during that time. How the teacher treats latecomers. Are they easily integrated into the activity and class in progress? What is done to help them be orientated and to catch up on what was missed earlier? More criteria to evaluate the teacher on. How closely the lesson plan was followed. Sometimes it is best to modify the lesson plan because of what develops in the classroom, and that could be a positive evaluation. Or, less positive, is to deviate from the plan, but with no seen benefits or objectives. Methodology, looking at how things are structured and done. Was there a certain technique or method used in general, like the communicative method or the grammar translation method? Perhaps a particular model such as PPP or test-teach-test was used. The observer can see how some activities or goals are approached, such as elicitation or the use of leading questions or peer correction, etc. Types of interaction can be important to look at, not just having an activity, but also how appropriate it was to do it in that way. Some examples are pair work, group work, teacher to class, one student to class, or a change of groupings within an activity. Board work, how the board, screen, or smartboard is used, considering clarity, usefulness, use of space, use of color and size, use of references, how long something remains on the board, future referencing, allowing unanticipated or student-generated questions, doubts, examples, information. Sometimes teachers can benefit from seeing how another teacher does their board work. Giving of instructions, clarity, length of time needed to give them, comprehension checks, different ways instructions are given, their effectiveness. Giving of explanations, clarity, length of time, comprehension checks, the manner or style in how the explanations are given, use of student input, and having students explain key points themselves. Pronunciation. Is any importance given to pronunciation in any way? What areas? Sounds, word stress, connected speech, intonation. Are students corrected or guided? Are there activities which encourage students to practice some aspects of pronunciation? Skills work. Which are being focused on and in what ways? How does the work done in this class contribute to the bigger picture in making progress in those skills? Language work. Grammar, vocabulary, pronunciation. These aren't skills per se, but more systems. How well are the students learning what is needed? Corrections. They can also include how the students approach their learning or apply their learning. We could look at how frequently corrections are done, how they are approached, in what situations, future checks, different ways of correcting. The use of L1, or the student's maternal language in class. Does the teacher permit or use L1 in some ways? In what situations? How effective is it? More criteria. Is the class atmosphere a good learning and working environment? Can and do the students feel they can take risks? How do they feel about making mistakes, learning something new and challenging? Are they encouraged to explore the language and to use it? Student involvement. Getting and keeping the students involved. Do only 2 or 3 students do most of the speaking or activities? Are some students left behind? Are some students bored? Are all students reached, and in the ways that individually relate to them? Student talking time versus teacher talking time. The length of time can be looked at, and in what situations? Comprehension checks. In instructions or covering key points when conveying important information about the language or using it. Those comprehension checks help a lot to see if the students understand what is said or what has to be done. Is the teacher actually checking or simply assuming the students understand? Incorporating students' reactions and learning styles into the lesson plan and its execution. Is there flexibility or a variety of approaches in order to reach all the students? You are teaching to a class as a whole, but you are also teaching a room full of individuals who have their own perspectives and tendencies. Practice of target language. Are there sufficient opportunities to explore and practice the language? Are the activities and exercises graded? Perhaps beginning with clearer tasks, exemplifying the structure or appropriate use, leading to freer activities where that language area only comes into play on occasion and is not so carefully controlled. How much time is given to different kinds of practice, and is the time and type of activities appropriate for what the students need? Making judgment calls on such things as length of time spent on an activity or modifying part of a plan due to something happening or not happening in class. Classroom management. This can cover a wide range, such as how teacher-centered the class is and in what situations, looking at the grouping of students, how the activities are carried out from beginning to end, dealing with the group dynamics, managing how the students are involved, dealing with doubts and difficulties as they arise, encouraging certain directions, dealing with students' perspectives, tendencies, and feelings, flow and continuity of activities within the lesson, with one activity leading to the next or building up to a certain end. This isn't absolutely necessary to do all the time, but when it is done, it can have a very good effect on the class. And it's also fine to have very distinct and different sections in the class that don't have to follow the same theme. Homework. When and how it is assigned. When and how it is dealt with. It can also include a good range of types of homework assigned over different classes, helping the students explore and strengthen a variety of areas of focus. Feedback. When and how is feedback given to students? And what feedback does the teacher receive from the students? Are all the students doing the exercises well, or do only a few students shout out the correct answers? Do the shy students have an opportunity to ask or comment on something? Is the teacher open to hearing things that might not coincide with her or his original intentions? Closure. This can refer to not only how the teacher ends the class, but how she or he closes each activity and section of the class. It can include how the homework is assigned, such as having the students do one example of each group of exercises so they have a clear idea of the expectations and how to go about completing the homework. It can also be how previous homework is dealt with. Closure here is acknowledging that it was assigned, that students did it, and any key points coming from doing those exercises are dealt with. Closure can be reminding the class of coming events like a test next week. It can be providing or eliciting feedback on select activities, approaches, and even the class as a whole. It can be going over vocabulary or highlighting key points that came up during the class. Some aspect the teacher wants to be observed and receive feedback on. This could be very important to the teacher, and observers should ask the teacher if there's something they would like here. For new teachers, having a formative observation, they are often told what the observer would like them to focus on. For seasoned teachers, they might like another person's perspective on one or two things that are of interest to them. Often teachers could use some feedback on how to tighten things up, to receive some insights on how to do things more effectively, something they can use to make their classes run more smoothly and can better achieve the goals they are setting. The criteria we have been looking at can serve as potential indicators of which areas to focus in on more, whether they are the observer communicating on those criteria, or the teacher, him or herself, reflecting on how they fare regarding those criteria. When giving feedback to the teacher after the observation, it is generally recommended to have a dialogue between the observer and the teacher, getting the teacher to offer or come up with insights and ways to strengthen some areas, and even offer explanations why some things worked or didn't work well. Good feedback to observed classes often includes an element of the teacher's self-reflection and being actively engaged in that dialogue, exploring one's approach to greater depths. It's good to have some sort of structure or guide when giving feedback to a teacher, and often there's some standardized form the observer fills out or follows, although there could be times when it might be best to explore a different approach. Here is one possible example of such a form. You don't want a form that is too cumbersome. In this example, there's a mixture of how one can approach reports and making evaluations. At the top, there is some essential information listed for quick reference. This is followed by a checklist of key points the school has decided important to cover. To add some further detail, the checks are ranked to help place how well each individual area was done. There is a little space for other areas if there is need for them to be added to the list as well. In the final part of the form is a more open-ended comment section where the observer is encouraged to go into more detail about some particular aspects which could be highlighted. Note that part of the evaluation includes some positive feedback, and the weaker areas are worded in such a way that they won't be devastating to the teacher receiving those assessments. Final words. The ultimate goals of teacher evaluation depend on many factors. Much, of course, depends on the institution the teacher is working in, But this isn't the only determinant of the priorities. We can consider what is important to the students and how to help them achieve good progress. We can also consider what the teacher would like to focus on, not only in their teaching skills, but how they feel about their work. Perhaps they feel more resources or support would be beneficial, or that some issues should be better addressed. We can evaluate a teacher in many ways, and we have looked at many criteria that can help us focus on what to look for. I'd like to add 4 more considerations that are relevant when evaluating a teacher. 1. Being vulnerable is part of being a teacher. Evaluations shouldn't be excessive. Teachers are in a very vulnerable position. They are vulnerable to the politics where they work and who they work with. They are subject to the whims of the current trends that pressure or influence us to follow ways that may not always seem logical or correct. Teachers are vulnerable because they are seen as authority figures, but can't guarantee a student's success in learning. Teachers are being evaluated constantly, and it is not possible to be evaluated 100% well in every category. If evaluations are too nitpicky or frequent, the teachers may begin to focus on getting good reports rather than focusing on being a good teacher. It's important to reassure the teacher. While they may not be perfect, and that will be shown in almost every evaluation, it is important to emphasize that the teacher is a welcomed member of the staff, and to take the evaluations as a positive look into their work, something that could be of benefit to them. 2. Good teachers are appreciated. Evaluations and feelings of vulnerability add considerably to the stress that teachers feel. There are moments, though, that good teachers are or can be appreciated. Some ways of evaluating teachers might reflect this to some degree, like questionnaires given to students, or a student bravely letting the teacher know of their feelings, or in a feedback session following an observation. But often the evaluations of teachers fall short in recognizing the work and effort they put in and out of the classroom. Not all teachers work hard. Not all teachers work hard in improving themselves. Not all teachers are gifted with special talents that the students can appreciate. Not all teachers can afford the time or energy to improve themselves as teachers. But most teachers try to find a balance that works for them. And while not all teachers are superstars, many do a very decent job, all things considered. Those teachers that do a decent job should be appreciated. They may not all win a popularity contest, but their solid contributions should be recognized. 3. Something from the heart and respecting individual growth and differences in students and in teachers. I would like to add something that I feel is relevant to evaluating a teacher, but would not be found in any procedure or form or considered criteria by any school or institution. I believe it to be a very important factor, and perhaps we are losing sight of this as we become more standardized, modularized, and dependent on technology and systems. It has to do with the heart. My mother was a teacher too, not an English teacher, but a kindergarten teacher, teaching children 5 years old, the year before they officially enter the school system. Back in her day, there were rules and systems to follow, but much of it was up to the teacher. They had to work out on their own how to teach their students. These days, more and more, teachers are being molded into good followers of prescribed systems. And unfortunately, many good teachers are being discouraged from developing their own individual ways to approach teaching and help the students learn. The objectives and ways to teach are set by authority figures far away and enforced by other authority figures in the schools. There are systems to follow, and there often isn't room for much else. That isn't to say that there shouldn't be rules or authority figures, but a greater flexibility would encourage some teachers to really shine and to reach their students more profoundly. My mother was a teacher in a small town in northern Canada. When she walks down the street or goes to some social event, it is not uncommon for her to encounter somebody who says, "You were my teacher 30 years ago. I still remember you and your classes. You were the best teacher I ever had." She hears that a lot, and there are many, many students who have special memories of her and how she approached teaching. She became an excellent teacher because she had the support of good supervisors who gave her a lot of room to experiment and to develop her way of teaching. They gave her the room to be able to reach her students in the ways she thought appropriate, because she was the one dealing with them every day. And she used that opportunity very well, dedicating much of herself to thinking of how to better reach the students. This isn't about the teacher's ego. It's about making an impression on the students, to get them to want to come to school, to get them motivated and interested in learning, to have them experience progress and success, and to see themselves applying what they are learning. At any age, children, teens, or adults, at any level of learning, with disabilities, average or exceptional learning abilities. They should know what it is to struggle through challenges, how to deal with them, and to know what it is to see and feel progress. 4. After spending all this time on communicating the importance of nurturing a good relationship between administration and teachers, I feel I must address the issue of surprise observations that some institutes still use. I've worked in many institutions and have observed many hundreds of classes. It is in my opinion and experience that planned observations, where teachers and administrators openly plan and prepare together before the observation, are much better at many levels than surprise observations. In fact, surprise observations can sometimes be very destructive, and any perceived advantages gained by having them are lost to all the benefits received by all concerned. In my experience, surprise observations create much unnecessary anxiety and insecurity in the students and the teachers being observed. Some administrations believe that this is a good form of control, and by catching the teacher off guard, they can see how that teacher really is in the classroom. I believe that the moment an observer enters the classroom, the atmosphere changes, and potentially intensely so with surprise observations. There's no context for the observer to understand why the teacher has chosen to approach the class in that way at that time. Sure, the teacher may be able to defend him or herself at a later date, but it is in a situation which augments the observer's power position and places the teacher into a defending role. I strongly believe it is to the benefit of both administration and teachers if they meet before and after the observed class to discuss as professionals what was observed, sharing perspectives and expectations. There are many advantages to such exchanges. Opening the door to better communication is very helpful, but even more so, such exchanges strengthen mutual respect and understanding on all sides. There are very few, if any, short-term or long-term advantages achieved through surprise observations. A teacher who is treated with professional and personal respect, who can act with dignity and take pride in doing his or her work, will contribute much to the school and to the students. When there is excessive control and adherence to a system without regard to individual differences, many good teachers will be lost and not encouraged to develop and grow into even better teachers. Planned observations, which encourage dialogue and clarify expectations, provide support, better morale and direction. Good teaching is about transmitting and learning good values beyond the immediate subject matter being taught. It is not about heavily relying on a standardized system. It is about interpreting a system to make it more flexible and beneficial for those affected by it. It's about supporting teachers, helping them help students to learn, and not necessarily always in the same prescribed ways. It's about helping teachers feel good about themselves, their work, their interactions with others. It's about encouraging the teachers and encouraging the students to feel good about what they are doing. When evaluating teachers, I believe it is to everyone's benefit to find a good balance between what is good for the school and what is good for the teacher. Some things can be standardized and expected, but there should be sufficient space for the teacher to maybe do some things a little differently. Evaluating a teacher can involve a lot of things. I hope that some of those that we've touched upon have been useful or helpful to you in some way. Please feel free to leave a comment if you're so inclined. And with that, I would like to conclude this talk on evaluating teachers through observations. In an observation, we can't see how the teacher handles him or herself in all possible situations, but we can see how well they do in some situations. It is very possible, even likely, a teacher and the class will act differently when not being observed. It is strongly recommended to treat observations and evaluations as something which can be beneficial to all those concerned. Treat the process and the people with full respect, and the evaluations will provide greater benefits to everyone. Thank you for checking this out, and all the best to you in your endeavors and explorations.